In this video, we are going to look at how biases and facts are related but different. The distinction between facts and biases is a very important one to understand when it comes to improving your media literacy. It will also help you better understand what we do here at Biasly and what the ratings on our website mean. By the end of this video, it is our hope that you will understand how bias and falsity can occur independently of each other. That is, how media can be biased and false, but also biased and true, and how sometimes it doesn't even make sense to think about truthfulness when evaluating bias. Don't worry if that seems overwhelming. We'll start from the beginning by looking at what bias is and what facts are. Bias, as defined by Oxford Languages, is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Oxford Languages defines fact as a thing that is known or proved to be true. You probably already have a pretty clear grasp of what facts are, but we've included its definition here so that you can directly compare it with the definition of bias. False information can certainly serve as prejudice in favor of or against someone or something. It is easy to imagine an article lying about a politician to portray them in a certain light. For example, an article could say that median income increased by $5,000 during a president's tenure, when, in reality, maybe it increased by only $1,000, or even decreased. This could definitely influence how you view that president, making it a clear case of bias. This is an example of something being biased and false. There are, however, other forms of prejudice in favor of or against something or someone besides false information. In addition to false information, bias can take the form of exaggerated or cherry-picked headlines or images, the inclusion of the author's opinions, slanted language with strong connotations, and more. A good way to think about truthfulness in relation to bias is to think of truthfulness as one of many components of bias. We've already looked at an example of something being false and biased. Now let's look at an example of something being completely true but biased nonetheless. Imagine the following is an excerpt from an article. We interviewed a couple activist groups to better understand the range of feelings Americans have towards the new policy. Both the Conservatives United and Right-Wing Association of America were in favor of the policy. Let's assume that this quote is completely true. Even if that is the case, this quote creates a biased impression of the issue. Two groups with similar political outlooks were the only ones interviewed. It can appear as if the policy is more support than it truly does because only the viewpoints of one side of the political spectrum were included. Bias can be just as much about what is included or excluded as it can be about truthfulness. Sometimes bias takes the form of opinion. When that's the case, it does not make sense to think about truthfulness. Opinion is expected in opinion pieces. Knowing that they are simply relaying someone's opinion, we intuitively approach opinion pieces differently than journalistic reporting. Opinion can create biased impressions when it is included in an article that is not labeled as an opinion piece and looks like straight news. Imagine you are reading an article that is overviewing what a politician plans to do if she is elected, and it says, "Her policy agenda will be mind-bogglingly expensive." Is that true? It's just an opinion. It can be true or false. It is just as true as someone saying that Tom Brady will win another 2 Super Bowls over the old age of 45. If you think bias is a measure of how truthful something is, you can easily get confused in a situation like this. You might consider it unbiased if it truly is expensive, but there will always be the question, precisely how expensive does something have to be deemed mind-boggling? If we consider our definition of bias mentioned earlier, then we will approach articles that include opinion differently. The term mind-bogglingly expensive has a highly negative connotation, and it is also an opinionated way of expressing a very high cost of the policy agenda. People typically do not like things to be extremely expensive, especially when they are paid for using their tax dollars. This term clearly acts as prejudice against the politician's agenda and is therefore biased. An unbiased way to express something similar might look like this. Her policy agenda is estimated to cost around $4.5 billion. That is $2 billion more than the current administration is budgeted to spend. There is no opinion or strong language toward the politician's agenda. It doesn't say whether spending that much is good or bad. Instead, it factually puts it in the context of the current administration. So far, we've looked at an example of something that is biased and unfactual, and two examples of different kinds of biases that are still factual. The first of those two was biased because it included only the perspectives of right-wing groups. That can be referred to as selection-omission bias. The second used two forms of bias, opinion and strong language. The point we've been trying to make over the course of this video is that there are many types of bias. A lack of truthfulness is one, but something can be biased for other reasons. Truthfulness is best thought of as one component of bias. Bias can also look like opinionated language, words with strong positive or negative connotations, misleading titles and images, and more. Don't feel like you have to remember every single example we've gone through, and know that bias can look different. It is important to be cognizant of things that mislead and shape your perception. Now that you're armed with this understanding of the relationship between truth and bias, we encourage you to go out and practice using it in the content you read. That is one of the best ways to develop the skill of assessing bias, and you can compare your assessments with the ratings Biasly's analysts come up with on the site. We encourage you to share your knowledge with others, so that they too can understand that there is more to misleading and biased news than false information. We can all benefit from improved media literacy.